This is the sound of your brain firing. A vast interwoven loom of electrical activity. My life's work has been to connect these brain waves to machines, a field known as brain-to-computer interfacing. Ultimately, I believe it'll lead to the enhancement of human brains.
Between your temples lies a machine more complicated and more marvelous than anything else we know in the universe.
Now in the 21st century, it's the era of mind. Who we are and what we are is all to play for. Brain-computer interfaces are going to become ubiquitous.
Human beings have been enhancing themselves since we crawled out of the trees. The challenge that we have today is we're getting better and better at it.
People are stimulating the brain to enhance behavior and to enhance cognitive function, essentially brain enhancement. One of the pitfalls of all this is ethical. Who should get this?
We have a moral responsibility to alert society when the technology that we're developing could have negative outcomes.
Phil Kennedy's original research was pioneering.
A lot of people, as I understand, even in the medical community, said this is not possible.
So what? I mean, we always believed it was, so I just ignored them all.
You do science by letting people do what they want.
How many cyborgs have you fathered?
6.
6?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm the 6th.
Science has always been skeptical of self-experimentation.
He's done some things that most people would say that was a little nuts.
In neuroscience circles, was controversial and people are skeptical. This is a case of a scientist who's so married to his idea that, he's even willing to put himself at risk.
Well, I had my reasons. They had their objections.
I think some people do view him as a founding father of modern brain-computer interface. I think some people see him as the worst kind of scientist.
He's a visionary. I think he's a genius. His contribution is going to be phenomenal to the world.
It's my brain, and I can do what I like with it. There's an emphasis these days to do science by committee, and they call it widespread collaborations. But first you have to have insight, intuition, or what I might call a hypothesis. And then you test that hypothesis. Serendipity is how people make discoveries, just totally by accident. History shows us that the best scientific ideas come from individuals and not from a committee. I mean, you know the definition of a committee. It's a horse that looks like a camel. I mean, it's just doesn't work. I'm a great believer in the loner.
Analyzes and codes everything that comes in. It screens out the meaningless. Reacting to important signals, it reaches into memory, selects the correct response, and directs your 200 pairs of muscles to carry it out.
The brain is never silent. Every thought requires the firing of millions of neurons. We like to call it an ensemble of neurons that have these waves of activity going through them. Electricity runs down the axon and hits another neuron, and that continues up to another one. Neurons that connect to other neurons connect to your muscles and so on. They call it the spinning loom. To date, I've implanted 42 rats, 8 implants in 6 monkeys, and 6 humans, including myself as number 6. Well, the idea behind brain to computer or brain to machine interfacing, it's a very simple idea whereby we record from the brain and connect it to some kind of machine, usually a computer, just brain to machine, brain to computer interfacing. Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, I work in my neurological clinic because I am a neurologist as well as a neuroscientist. The clinic only goes from like 9 to 5, 9 to 4:30, so it's not bad. And then I come back here and I work here for a while, and I usually work a bit in the evening. I always do. So I don't know how many hours that is. I never counted them. 60, 80, whatever. Well, my specific short-term goal, if short-term is like, I guess, the next 10 years, is to help people who are locked in to communicate, to actually speak. One of the key things about all biology, from animals who communicate, they say even the trees communicate, but humans certainly do. And that keeps us interacting, keeps us going. You know, you have to communicate.
Helping people with very severe disabilities is one of the primary motivators that started brain-computer interface research, because there's no other options for these people.
Locked-in syndrome covers several diseases. One of the commonest is ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. They're still smart, they're still intelligent, and Stephen Hawking is the best example.
What makes human beings unique? There are many theories. Some say it's logical reasoning. Others say it's language or tools.
There are a lot of technologies, such as the ballpoint pen. The typewriter was developed for a woman who was blind. So these are critical technologies that we have today. They were all developed for people with disabilities. When they became in the mainstream, then they were easy to get, they were cheap, they're things that are just in our lives all the time. So having brain-computer interfaces that work for the mainstream will make them better, cheaper, faster, more effective for people with disabilities.
It will happen that we will implant our own brains to enhance them. I think it's part of the evolution of the human race.
Trying to predict the future is a discouraging and hazardous occupation. Our bodies and our brains still have immense untapped potentialities. For example, to cope with the information explosion, we may develop a machine for recording information directly onto the brain, as today we can record a symphony on tape. I think we should regard it as a privilege to be stepping stones to higher things.
There is a world where push buttons relieve the pain of a sick mind and the mechanisms that control all behavior. A world where machines manipulate living beings.
Probably reading science fiction is what got me into brain implants, and seeing films like The Matrix, a remake of The Manchurian Candidate. And then when I found out that scientists were actually working on brain implants that could make some of this science fiction become reality, I thought that was really exciting, and I wanted to find out what was going on.
Have you been dreaming?
Yes, I have.
You could start with Galvani, where you showed that the nervous system was electrical, and he could shock the muscle or nerve of a frog's leg and it would jump.
Some of the first brain implant experiments back in the 1930s looked at the possibility of stimulating the pleasure center of the brain so you felt ecstasy or bliss, possibly all the time, which is a pretty amazing possibility.
Just exactly what takes place, I don't know. I can press the middle one, which is a very enjoyable feeling.
This is the period when lobotomies were also invented. Shock therapy was invented back in the 30s as well.
There were a lot of sketchy people and sketchy studies about what you could do to control behavior and control the mind.
When you think back, it was really, really terrible and should never have happened. And it turned everybody off against functional neurosurgery.
Jose Delgado was trained as a neurologist in Spain. He created these miniature devices that he could stick inside the skull that could both read signals from the brain and stimulate the brain. He called them stimocievers.
A bull ring in his native Spain provides the setting for Delgado's most spectacular demonstration.
Delgado was a very interesting scientist because he realized that there are parts of the brain that control significant movements, like a bull charging at you. If you get a bull real mad, he's going to charge at you. So he implanted the bull, stood out there, and had the bull charge at him, pressed the button, and the bull stopped dead. It just stopped in his tracks. He did that over and over again.
Now Professor Delgado faces the bull himself. Again, the animal turns on command. Repeatedly, the bull was tamed by radio signals beamed to the electrodes in his brain.
Were you sure that that bull was going to stop as it approached you when you pushed the right button?
Scientists always should have faith in science. I had faith in science. The animal stopped.
I think when Jose Delgado did his experiments, the word that became really popular was mind control. There was a lot of discussions about whether the research was ethical or not, who was funding this research.
Delgado, he called himself a pacifist, and that brain implants are the way to cure the problem of violence and aggression and warfare. The reason that people were a little freaked out by this is obvious, that the question is, who gets the brain implant and who has the controller? Who's deciding whether your brain needs to be stimulated because you're too aggressive? A lot of people started seeing brain implants as really terrifying, not as something that was going to make society be better, but as something that could create some kind of world that would make 1984 look relatively benign.
I got interested in brain-computer interfacing in 1986 when I started working in Georgia Tech. As far as I know, that in the 1980s there was nobody else working on brain-computer interfacing and certainly nobody implanting for that purpose.
The idea of brain-computer interfaces and the way that people like Phil Kennedy was thinking about it involved a relatively small community. He was in a niche field, and in that field he was as big as anybody could be.
I don't think these things are accidents. John Goldthwait said, "Melody, hey, you need to meet this guy. This is Dr. Phil Kennedy, and he's working on a brain implant for people who are paralyzed." And my head exploded. And I said, "What?"
Well, that's a strange
Excuse me? And
effect I had on you. Your head exploded, okay.
this is true. So I said, "Well, Dr. Kennedy, would you like a free computer scientist?"
The brain behaves as an interreacting whole, but at the same time, it has areas related to particular activities, which it is possible to map.
In the 1980s, there was a lot of studies that said that there is activity patterns in this part of the brain, the motor cortex it's called, and we had to study that by using what's called a micro-electrode, which is a very tiny, almost like a little pin. And it'll pick up these electrical impulses, and they sort of speak this funny language, which is kind of like pop, 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 pop. And that actually means something because it's communicating that message down to your spinal cord and out to your muscles. And what was discovered in the 1980s is that you could actually understand the language. You could translate it. It was like translating Croatian into French or something. It was a translator. And the first person to really put an electrode like that in a human was Phil Kennedy.
The brain is such that it likes to reject everything that we put into it. It's not at all hospitable to devices. So you have to trick the brain into accepting your device, and you have to trick it into not scarring. But the key thing was to get clean signals that would reliably endure for years. We got around that problem, not by putting something close to a neuron. We just said, let the neurons come to us.
He used a different kind of electrode, which was basically a tiny wire inside a very tiny glass cone. The little processes of the neurons would grow up into the cone and make contact with the wires, and he would have a few signals.
There's coiled wire, which is coiled over this very simple glass pipette. And at the tip, there's a glass cone. The brain traps the electrode inside itself. So the brain goes all the way through both ends of this tiny cone. And so if it wants to reject it, it can't. What I did to show that this system works is that I implanted what's called the barrel cortex of rat. And each barrel is related to one whisker. If you stimulated just one or two of the whiskers, you picked up the recording. And the other whiskers, nothing, and on the other side, nothing. So that showed that the system was operational, and it remained like that. And I put little wires in there too, and I could record signals, and that worked too. And that's when I said, hey, this is going to work. That was 33 years ago. That's a while ago. This electrode provided us with stable signals. Originally, we used Radio Shack radios that sends the signal to the computer, and it was kind of fun, and it worked. We did the first human implant in '96. It all is really slow. I mean, really, really slow. I mean, I'm talking about years, not just months. We go to conferences with posters, which are large 6x4 feet of data laid out, so we can explain it to the participants when they come by. I'll get a scissors, just hang on. We lay out the subject and what we did and the results, and then some discussion over there. We had in mind ALS and brainstem stroke. Nobody was implanting at the time that we did it. I didn't get any great interest out of it until we had Johnny Ray, and then, of course, it just exploded in interest.
At Emory University in Atlanta, doctors have performed a radical, first-of-its-kind procedure that has the potential to help thousands of people who've been completely paralyzed by stroke.
It's inventor Dr. Philip Kennedy joining us this morning from Atlanta. This sounds like something out of Star Trek. This patient, John, he actually spelled his name using the device.
A year ago, JR had a stroke that left him unable to move, speak, or breathe on his own. But this week, he accomplished something that millions of similarly paralyzed people have only dreamt of. He communicated.
Yes, awesome. That's the first time.
He spelled his first name.
We're now at the graveside of the world's first cyborg. He was a hero, in my view.
Dr. Bakay, you actually performed this surgery. Is there someday, instead of telling a computer what to do, tell parts of our body what to do?
You can start to move devices such as wheelchairs. You can start moving prosthetic devices to move limbs. There's a whole variety of things that this can open up.
Johnny was probably one of the most remarkable men I've ever known.
Wasn't he?
Just unbelievable person, unbelievable courage. We would ask him every day, what are you thinking of to control the cursor? And every time he would say, oh, I'm thinking about moving my left hand, I'm thinking about moving my right foot. And one day he said, I'm thinking of nothing.
Nothing.
And Phil and I, we looked at each other
and said, let's
and
go
we're like,
home.
what does that mean? So we believe that this is the very first time that a human being has actually controlled a device, that their brain directly has controlled a device. Because over time, just practicing and practicing and practicing, he taught his brain to drive the cursor. So that was a huge moment in neuroscience.
I see this smile on your face and this glint in your eye. It makes you think that you've really done something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think this is a field that has exploded because it was a brand new field. You invented it. I don't know if you knew this, but MIT Technology Review in 2000 said brain-computer interfaces was one of the top 10 technologies that was invented in the last century. So, and
like the year before?
Yeah, the last century. Well, over the last century. You did the last quarter of that century. You were working in that.
Wow. It did strike me that maybe this technology could be used for good or for evil, and people could abuse it. So that was a concern at the time. Thankfully, it hasn't happened yet.
Physicist and author Stephen Hawking, who uses similar technology, gave ITN his reaction.
If direct connections to the brain can be developed, it will be a revolution for everyone, not just the disabled. But I wouldn't want to try it until it has been well tested. And I would use it only if I could control what went out. I don't want computers reading my thoughts.
Mainly, I grew up in Limerick, in Ireland. Went to a good Jesuit school there. It's one thing they teach you, it's how to think. That's the thing I like about the Jesuits. They really teach you how to think. They question you. There's medicine in the family. My father was a surgeon, and my mom, she taught French. She was French. And my grandfather was a very famous surgeon in Ireland back in the day. So, following my family footsteps.
Originally, he intended to become a priest, and he went to seminary for 6 months. And then he decided that he didn't have a vocation, but he then went into medicine. And I think that's where his true vocation is.
I went to UCD and did pre-med and then 6 years of medical school. My motivation at the time was to become a physician, a doctor of some kind, whether it was surgery or not, just to try to help people. The fact is that I wanted to do research as well. I was kind of ambitious on two fronts. And so there was no research here, and there was no neurosurgical training here. They produced too many doctors, so half of us had to leave the country, and with the hope of coming back. But I never did come back. Ireland, at that time, was impoverished.
There are about 1,500 people in Dublin who don't have a home to call their own. Some of them sleep out, but most live in hostels where they get their meals and a bed, but during the day, they walk the streets.
While I was at UCD in Dublin, I worked with homeless people and saw the huge problem that is, people who sleep out in the street at night. And we spent our time bringing out soup and bread to them just to help them. That made a big impression on me, of course. Alice Leahy was the lady who now runs the Alice Leahy Trust, and she looks after homeless people.
The Trust organisation was set up in 1975 after an investigation by nurse Alice Leahy into the type of medical care that destitute people were getting in this country.
Phil had and still has star qualities. I mean, he was the most handsome man you would ever see. And I thought, oh, he won't understand. You know, you should never judge people by how they look or how they speak or any of that. And it was the beginning of the two of us spending a lot more time working in the field. We would both talk about what we can do to help this person.
Ladies and gentlemen.
He would encourage people, look, take your medication, go to your doctor. Why don't you go up to Brendan's? Because that was the main psychiatric services. We would talk about the pain that these people were suffering, but we also knew them as people.
You can put down, this is...
There was a person there called Christy. And Christy said to me one day, Christy was psychotic, but when he was sober, he said to me, Phil, get out of here, go to the States or somewhere and develop your career, and don't just stay here. I thought about that and I said, really? This guy telling me to go? But he was right. He could see it. I mean, he was a smart guy in between the psychotic episodes, which were devastating. But so I did what he said.
This is Christy, and I often feel of the people we met, you could see their lives etched in their faces.
The conversation I had with Christy was instrumental in at least making me think outside the box and think outside Ireland. I think it was instrumental in that. When I arrived in Atlanta, I was married. I had 2 kids and 1 on the way.
My father was a dad who was very driven by his work. So I would say that in a lot of ways shaped his priorities. At the same time, he always tried to be at every game, participate in our lives and be a part of our lives. My father's motivated by desire to help people. That's been the underlying theme of his research and really of his life.
His electrode and the work that we were doing started to gain a lot of media attention. There were reporters at his door pretty much 24/7 because this had never been heard of before. What, you can control a device with a brain directly? That's huge, and it was, they were right.
Hello everyone, how are you doing today?
The fact that it worked, the fact that the government was willing to fund it and other governments were willing to fund it, and also some industry was willing to fund it, we were allowed to grow the field.
At Neural Signals, one of the leading companies in the field, scientists are bridging the gap between human and machine.
The dream was that one day we could take a paralyzed person and reconnect their brain back to their body so that somebody who was paralyzed, you wouldn't know the difference.
You're watching something extraordinary. Kathy Hutchinson is controlling a robotic arm with her thoughts. Paralyzed from the neck down, this is the first time in nearly 15 years she has served herself a drink.
I know we can go there now. I know that we can help a person who's unable to move their arm after a stroke, that one day they'll be back in their office typing or moving. This is going to be a long way off. I'm not promising something that's going to happen tomorrow, but it's really a vision that I think we can realize.
People started believing this was possible because, you know, Phil showed it, and then John Donahue showed it, and started saying, oh, this is real. This is possible. This isn't just a science fiction novel. This really is something that could help people who desperately need help.
This is a very old implant. This implant was in one of the patients after JR, very large, very bulky, and then this is the connection to the electrode. After JR, we implanted 4 more after that. So these are some records. And this is a record from David Jane. David Jane, a middle-aged ALS patient who was almost totally locked in. He had slight facial movements with which he could control a computer.
ALS is like being rolled up in a rug so tightly, you cannot move, you cannot eat, you cannot breathe. I feared becoming locked in, unable to communicate.
He was an inspiration for us to develop a small device that we could put on the side of his face. He had slight facial movement, like a twitch in the eye, and that was it was a very sensitive device, picking up electrical activity from the muscle, and we used that switch to control his computer.
The laptop, communications software, along with Dr. Kennedy's EMG sensor, puts me on a level field in cyberspace.
And I asked him if he would like us to try to restore movement of his hand so he could control a computer board and so on. Or would he prefer if we control speech? And he said, through his computer, speech. No question, it has to be speech.
I did not pause to ponder. Near spontaneous speech would improve the quality of my life exponentially.
You know, you have to communicate. And as David Jane said, it just make me feel human again. So maybe talk to my kids, you know, and it was really, that really got me. In the diaries, we recorded everything we did every day, every study. And that inspired us to go ahead and try to do the speech prosthetic. Try to go into the brain and restore near conversational rate speech had not been attempted.
He wanted to do something to stay a step ahead, not competitively, but just that problem's being solved. So it's not as interesting now. There's a lot of people working on it. Let's do something new that hasn't been solved. And so putting things in auditory cortex was something that nobody had even thought of doing yet. So, you know, he's like that. He's an innovator that way. And he wants to solve the problem that no one else has ever solved.
At the age of 16, a car crash left Eric Ramsay paralyzed from the neck down. For the past 7 years, he has been reliant upon nursing staff and his family for all his needs.
I met Eric through his father. He got in touch with me. And his father knew about us from a special ed teacher in the special ed school that Eric was in. Eric had a hard time communicating even with a letterboard and even with eye movements. So it was good that we met him. I figured this was the ideal patient because he was totally locked in. He needed speech. So we'll give it a try.
Eric was 100% locked in. Sight,
hearing, touch, smell. The body still has all those functions, but has no control over muscles at all other than eye movement. Even though he could look up for yes and down for no, at that time, he couldn't do it on command and every time he wanted to. So we were at a dead end. I mean, no one else had anything to offer other than Dr. Kennedy. What had happened is he wanted to know if he could go with a friend to the late movie, and I told him, yeah, there was no problem. And as they were leaving, and a lady was making a legal U-turn, they hit her. As she was pulling out, they hit her, and then their car swerved over and hit the curb and flipped over into some small trees. And that's where they were when the fire department got to them.
Eric's dad, Eddie, was totally devoted to his son. He would take him for walks in the wheelchair. They took him to football games. They took him to baseball games. They really, did the best they could. We loved his son, and, you do it.
They told us that, we needed to make a decision, put him in a nursing home or to care for him at our house. And he was 16 years old. There was no way we were going to put him in a nursing home.
I didn't put any rosy features on it. I didn't say that it was going to be wonderful. I said we're going to try to restore his speech.
There were a lot of studies that I researched, and people said that they would have given up their limbs to have their speech back, to be able to communicate. For one thing, it gave him a reason to live.
Eric is now at the center of an experimental therapy led by neurologist Dr. Philip Kennedy. The idea is to connect Eric's mind to a computer through an electrode in his brain. The ultimate aim of this brain-to-machine communication is to restore to Eric the power of speech.
We implanted Eric at the end of 2004. We decided to try to develop a speech prosthetic in Eric, and he used what they use for motor control, a special program, a software to do that. So that allowed Eric to control the cursor and move it around the screen.
Listen. Speak. Listen.
And when we realized that Eric could actually control the cursor in that manner, we were all delighted. We let out a big cheer. It's not very professional, but, after all, we're human too.
Ready, Joe? Here we go. Da, 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 da. Da, da. Da. Da, da.
He had about an 80% accuracy rate. Eric was really, you could tell he was excited about that. It's like, anybody playing a video game or something for the first time, and that, to him, I guess that was like playing a video game with your brain.
Ready? Yeah, he says he's ready. Da, da. Da. Very good.
We did a whole series of experiments showing that what we recorded was not just noise, that it was functional.
Da, da, da.
After about the third or fourth time, it could have been that something in his brain happened, or, he just started deteriorating. It didn't make any sense when he did it, so we had to give it up.
And then that was it. He was very sick at that point. He could sit up a little bit, but if he sat up too much, he'd just pass out. So it was clear to me that the stroke extended into nuclei in the brainstem that control his blood pressure, the autonomic nuclei. So then by year 10, we recorded one more time, but he couldn't even lift his head before passing out. And over the 10 years, it didn't work fully, but we got reams of information and data, and it led us to the next step. We had funding to implant Eric, and in fact, we had a lot of funding. I was able to have quite a lot of people here in the lab. And then that ran out, so, well, we just motored on. So I had to find a new way to get around that. I could have left my research as it was. It just wasn't finished. I just hadn't been able to get Eric to speak. So I said, okay, what's the next step? I was funded myself for my clinical work, so I would be independent of grant income, which is notoriously variable. I decided the best thing to do was to implant myself and answer the questions that we couldn't answer with Eric. My back was definitely against the wall. The biggest risk was that I might lose it all. The NIH would never give me funding to implant myself. And the FDA, if I tried to do it here, would go berserk. So, well, they would not be pleased, let's rephrase that. I just found Dr. Cervantes' internet or something. And I was looking for somebody in Central America. I looked at Costa Rica, Honduras, and all that. We mainly communicated by email. Paul Poughton, who was organizing it, he was running the medical tourism. A lot of people go down there to dentists or different physicians to get things done for cash. And so he sort of organized it. I had no reservations. I had very careful planning in case something bad went wrong. I made out a will just to make sure that if things did go wrong and stay wrong, that I'd be okay. I didn't ask anybody to come with me. I just went down and got it done and came back. Pretty straightforward.
Just like every time he was committed to doing his research, our concern wasn't going to stop him from continuing to do it.
I knew that they'd all be against it, so I decided, well, I'll tell them when I get back. They were not too happy. My daughter was very unhappy. I had a friend of mine, a girlfriend of mine at the time. So listen, if they were going to worry about it or try to persuade me not to go, I wouldn't have listened to them. I would have gone anyway. So save your breath and don't bother me.
We were talking about something, and he said he's thinking of doing it. And I said, "Are you sure?" He said, "Yeah, why not? I could do it to myself if I do it to other patients." Well, he knew there would be a wave of opposition from my mother, from my sisters, from, you know, block the ears, don't say anything, and just do it. I think that was a smart move.
For someone to do that to themselves, they have to be just, you know, of that state of mind that this is my only option. It's selfless in one hand because you're putting yourself at risk, but then it's selfish on the other hand for what you put your family and everybody else through. When his mind is set and this is what he's gonna do, that he's committed and there is no changing his mind.
There is a long history of self-experimentation in science, and that's a good thing often because you make great strides through those kinds of insights. It can also be destructive because if you go too fast or you go too far, you can actually step beyond where the science is at the time and cause harm to yourself.
I had a nightclub here in Belize City for 4 years. I was a young man. I used to love the club and whatever. And so I opened my own and thought it would just be a few friends that would come there and party there, but it turned out to be huge, bigger than I expected. I just facilitate everything, put all logistics together, the travel arrangements, picking the patients up from the airport, taking them to a hotel, arranging the surgery, the team, getting everything put together. The doctor turns up, does his job, and the patient walks out. So far, 100% record, everybody's pain-free.
Phil was the one who instigated the contact with us. Dr. Phil Kennedy, apparently Dr. Cyborg. And I was surprised that they found us. He was suggesting that he would like to come down on a vacation. We had no idea that vacation would include electrode implantation on his own brain.
Paul says, let's go drink something, a cup of coffee, something. And we sit down and we start drinking a cup of coffee and we're talking. And then he brings up Phil and he says, would you ever implant brain electrodes in a patient who is normal? Electrodes in Phil. I said, I could change Phil's brain and it never goes back to what it is. I said, but, you know, if I'm willing, if he's willing to sign my waivers, and I said, in the name of neuroscience, I'll do it.
Chances of significant brain damage was very remote. I mean, would it have killed me? No.
Why would a person who has a perfectly good brain, probably much better than most people, he's a neuroscientist, why would he want to interfere with that process and want to do it for himself? Why would he do that? There's so much things could go wrong.
There's a photograph of me just before the surgery with a big grin on my face. I mean, there's a certain level of anxiety. It wasn't like, I want to get out of here. Nothing like that. Just get on with it.
Watching Phil lying on this table, you know, fully, and looks up and he looks you in the eyes and he's like, you can do this. I trust you, you can do this. I went to surgery, went very focused, very prepared. You know, I just closed my eyes, I put my hands like praying on the patient. And I said, let's go for it.
The surgery was a long surgery. There was so much to put together, electrodes, everything to open the skull, totally different tools that I'm used to seeing. And here's my friend now, lying there, having his head opened up, you know. Yeah, it was an apprehensive moment. After we took off the cap, the skull cap, we had to locate parts of it that we already knew from Phil's diagrams where we needed to implant and locate the electrodes. But yeah, it was very intensive, very invasive.
I was just being extra careful, extra careful, because I didn't want to leave him maimed. It's a millimetric movement, too much, 1 millimeter in makes a huge difference. And I describe it like momentarily, no hearing, tunnel vision, you know, and I feel like I'm traveling through a time machine. The moment you do that movement, it's incredible. It's like your finger becomes one with the electrode.
We had planned for him to stay at least 4 nights, 5 days. We didn't want him going earlier than that because, as I say, it was very invasive. One thing that I didn't like was the fact that Phil turned up on his own. We figured out, I wonder even if his family knows he's here. We had determined that Phil was fit enough to go to the villa, to recover, relax. It's a ground floor air-conditioned apartment, oxygen, medications, nurse 24/7.
Right after the surgery, I was speaking, but a day later, I wasn't. Provoked some anxiety, but I figured that it was due to swelling, and I was anxious, yeah.
I hadn't reached home when I got a call, and I was hoping for the best, but it was not the best. He had started to have seizures, which wasn't something that I was familiar with, and I don't know, you know when you get those butterflies in your stomach? They were going crazy at that point because I really and honestly didn't know what could be happening with Phil. We got him into the vehicle, took him straight to ICU. I called ahead while I was driving to make sure that they were ready for him. A twitch in the face and a grinding, constant grinding of their teeth. What was happening was not normal. I was just like, my goodness, what have we done? What has he done? What has he done to himself? What has he allowed us to do?
At one point, the seizures were a little bit violent. My support staff were like, we're gonna kill this guy, we're gonna be sued, we're gonna be blacklisted. And everybody was looking at me like, you've done the wrong thing, you know, you should never have done this. And the fingers started, you know, they're not doing this, but you can feel it. It's like, you're crazy, you should never have done this.
He tried a lot of times to talk. And he couldn't write. I tried to give him pen and paper. And in fact, he was writing backwards. Here's a guy who had a perfectly good brain, goes and has brain surgery. Now he can't talk and they can't write. So concerned. Yeah, we were worried.
I was not the least bit worried. I knew the risks, I knew what was going on. The surgeon, I was very confident in him, Dr. Cervantes. So, you know, I knew what was going on, and that banishes fear.
This was a part of my life that I had no idea what was happening until afterwards. You reflect back and you go, man, you know what? If it was a mistake, it was a good one. That's pretty much it. But looking back, yeah. Would I do it again? I have to think about that one, but if it's Phil, no.
5 days, a week later, I started to speak and started to write, and then in a few months, I was pretty much back to normal. I mean, it's the old story, you know. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs, right?
From my perspective, the phrase, you can't make an omelet without breaking an egg, you're not considering yourself to be the egg.
He told me himself, and I said, you're kidding me, right? And he said, no, I implanted myself. I said, that is interesting and a little crazy. I think most of the world was intrigued and horrified that somebody would go to that length to actually continue their research. I felt the same way.
Of course we were worried about him. When it's your own family, your own father, you're very concerned for his well-being. On the other hand, you know, he wanted this. This was something that he absolutely was committed to doing, and he knew the consequences.
I really was worried for Phil. I think that things should be done under a proper medical supervision at the right time with the proper consent. So self-experimentation worries me. We care about him, you know. He's like a brother in science, and he's in the same field, and we obviously don't want anything to happen.
It's clearly a pioneering, awesome thing to do. I mean, you know, it's a high-risk thing, but, you know, you can't help but admire him for it.
I was invited to speak at the annual neurosurgery conference, and I described what we did and the results, because these were neurosurgeons, and I wanted to give them all the details and told them about all the side effects I had. And they were all sitting there like, oh, they dropped their jaws. You really did that? What kind of idiot are you?
Doing things like that can make you seen on the fringes, maybe not a black sheep, but on the fringes, willing to do things that other people think is not a wise idea.
Whether they approved or disapproved was irrelevant to me. And, you know, like I said before, it's my brain. I can do what I want with it as long as I'm not hurting somebody else. These are the DVDs of my own surgery in Belize. Eric, even though he did a lot of work, we could never be sure if he was speaking. I needed someone who was speaking and then not speaking. And it's hard to get volunteers for that to implant someone's brain. There was the implantation in July 2014. I'm going to show you that. Okay, the ear is up here. I'm lying on my right side, so the ear is there and my nose is here. It's pretty gory. I'm not sure you'd show this to everybody because people would just freak out, you know. He's made an opening in the surface of the cortex. Yeah, this is a good part, actually. Put the tip of the electrode, the glass tip, and pushes it. Okay, that's plenty. Thank you. It was for scientific reasons that I did it. I honestly don't consider it a big deal. I know a lot of people do, but I really don't. It was just logical steps to do to figure out how this works. I still have the 4 electrodes tips in my brain. The electronics and all that are gone. When I came back from Belize, I set about recording from myself just the way I had from the other patients. And we got signals. Something I could not do in locked-in patients who are mute was to, first of all, have a control period where I would sit quietly. And then there was a period where I would speak silently in my head. You can take those signals and decode them into speech. But the difference between audible and silent speech, there was no difference. If I put this here, you can see that it pops up above the line and below the line too. They're the signals that we picked out of this continuous stream of data. After that analysis, we knew that we could restore speech of people who are locked in. During the week, I spend Monday and Wednesday and part of the weekend and evenings developing the research. I've spent a lot of time decoding the data. I mean, I've been doing that now for years, and then trying to get funding for it, because I'm out of funds right now. There are a lot of hurdles, but it does all boil down to having enough money to get the job done. $1 million would be good. I would start implanting more patients.
The jury is still out. The problem he's trying to solve is a really intriguing one. The challenge for Phil right now is to take his idea that he had a long, long time ago, 30 years ago, this tiny little electrode, and update it, because the funding agencies typically don't fund what they call continuing research. The technology that he has been around a long time.
Scientists and engineers are building better and better brain-computer interfaces. Companies like Facebook, Microsoft, they obviously can see that this is going to be the new personal computer.
What if you could type directly from your brain? It sounds impossible, but it's closer than you may realize.
It is a different time in that brain-computer interfaces now are attempting to have much more precision, have many more electrodes, have more data collected. The holy grail is trying to understand the brain well enough so that you can then translate that into predictable behavior and maybe intervene in that behavior.
Brain-computer interfaces are going to become ubiquitous. The new wave of brain-computer interfaces are non-invasive. So this would be like a helmet that you wear. You will be able to connect yourself to the net directly. So instead of having a cell phone in your pocket, you'll have something in your head. No? So this could make personal computers obsolete.
Once the technology is safe, why not? I mean, look, I constantly consult Wikipedia every day because, I want to know this piece of information. Well, wouldn't it be cool if rather than looking up, the life of Louis XIV, I can just think about Louis XIV. I either spell it out or just think about the French king. And then up comes this Wikipedia page and it projects, the image is directly projected in my visual cortex. That's freaking awesome. I would love something like that, okay?
We are on the brink of, and possibly already and to some extent, monitoring the emotional temperature and emotional states of hundreds of millions of people.
After 2 years of secrecy, Musk gave the public its first look at his brain computing startup Neuralink, a venture he says will merge the human brain with AI. The goal is implanting devices in humans, allowing them to potentially control phones and computers and even trade thoughts with each other digitally.
There's a tendency to think that we're talking about the future, but we're not. I think we're talking about the present. I think we're talking about these fantasies in a lot of cases and what they say about our culture right now, and also the connections with the past. These ideas have always been part of our religious ideas, our mythologies and other fantasies. They've always been with us. It just so happens that right now technology is kind of the vector of these desires and fantasies.
Society as a whole needs to decide, where do we draw the line and, what kinds of lines can you draw?
Imagine if we have chips inside, mini computers inside our head, how much more power they will have over us, how much more they will know about us. And brain implants, I think, would be the point of no return.
We'll be able to decipher the contents of our minds, the contents of our thoughts, and manipulate them.
Everybody trying to develop a neuroprosthetic knows that it's not just for a neuroprosthetic. It's ultimately to enhance humans. And that is, I guess, the end game. But just to develop a device for the sake of making a fortune is not my style.
The ultimate aim for Dr. Philip Kennedy is that he wants to be able to decode speech from people who can't speak.
Do you think that history will look at what Phil Kennedy's done and say that was the start of something important, it was a milestone?
My instinct is he's very much on the fringe, if you like. He's not in the mainstream of neuroscience at the moment. Who knows? It's very hard to tell.
I think what happens in a number of fields sometimes is you have an initial instigator, and that person is often iconoclastic and they're breaking rules and that kind of thing, and they show proof of concept. But because of their very nature sometimes, they end up being peripheral to the field, and I think that's exactly what happened with Phil Kennedy. So they move on to the next thing, and the next thing may be brilliant or it may be crazy. And I think the general feeling in neuroscience is that Phil left the kind of range of acceptable experimentation in neuroscience, and so he is not really part of mainstream brain-computer interface research anymore.
He does find it very frustrating, I know that. I mean, he's a fairly stubborn guy, very persistent. It's trying to show the worth of what he's doing is difficult to get across. I actually did become aware of what Philip did about 6 or 7 years ago when he asked me to look at some plans he was drawing up, and I was very impressed. And I thought it was superb, and I thought there'd be no problem in raising funds for it, but we came up against stone walls. I could have had Chinese investors for him, but he didn't want it because they would take the technology, which they do.
I believe that the technology we're developing should be used to help people. To do that, to get it out there, it takes money, and it takes a return of money to do it. I don't intend to stop.
If you believe in researching, you believe how much good it's going to do in the long run, you're willing to make small sacrifices. And so Dr. Kennedy is not one to give up. You gotta excuse me. It's just memories.
Eric passed away in October 2017, and of course he had a very touching funeral. I was asked to speak there, and it was very traumatic. I just kind of broke down, basically, because it was very touching for me, you know, what he had done, what he'd, you know, kept doing for us right up to the end.
How you doing? Good. Hello. When we got involved with the research project, it gave him hope. It gave him a reason to stay alive and to work. Yeah.
Truly, Eric was able to control his signals. He was able to control his brain signals. We know that. There's reams of data on that. And you looked after Eric for, oh my God, well over 10 years, because I didn't meet you for a few.
17 years.
17 years. You're a hero, man. And you devoted your life to it.
What I would like to see out of your research is, first of all, I'd like for you to see a patient enjoy it.
Well, I will try, and I will always remember Eric and you. The human race is going to evolve and will be unrecognizable in the next century. Imagine if you had the cell phone under your scalp and had a few electrodes in your brain and the ability to haul down whatever information you need from the cloud. And the future is going to be easier, more instantaneous, and direct from your brain.
We started our journey towards becoming cyborgs right from the time when somebody living in caves picked up, a stone tool.
From the beginning of time, people have always wanted to improve themselves, and it's no secret that they've developed technology to do that. So why would neurotechnology be unique from that? The beautiful thing about the brain is that it can adapt and change and learn.
Tools have always reciprocally changed us. Our brains were required to have enormous memory capacity. We actually don't need that anymore. We have technology that serves as our memory. We have to try to be wise about which of our human functionings it's better to offload onto machines because we don't need them, and which ones are so essential to our humanity that offloading them onto machines will be a real loss. Parts of our natures resist it, parts of our natures adapt to it, and we do that dance throughout our evolutionary history.
You can't really begin to talk about what it means to be human without speaking about technology. It's part of what we are. Technology is part of what makes us human.
One of the wonderful things about humans is that we're constantly changing. There's no optimal version of us even as individuals. Humanity as a whole, as long as it's growing and coming up with new ways to be human, that's a good thing. Rather than thinking there's some end point, perfection or whatever you want to call it, that would be the end of our adventure. Who would want that?
The brain still remains the most complex frontier, and we would be lucky if we were able to understand it in a century. So maybe if we say it's the century of the brain, it's not because we understand it, but because we will still be struggling to understand it.
It will happen in small steps. I see no end to the evolution of humans. I do think it's inevitable that brains will be enhanced. If you don't like it, get used to it, because it's going to happen. If you hang on to your dream, a way will come. I have huge regrets about not getting Eric to speak. But that's the way it goes. That's science for you. And you have to learn to persevere. The patients I've dealt with were real heroes. I mean, they knew that they were in this horrible predicament. They wanted some way out to give them some hope that just maybe, if it didn't work for them, it would work for somebody else. They do show the best of humanity. When I went to Belize to have the surgery, the risks were there, and I knew there were risks. I would 100% do it again. I'd do it again myself if I needed to. But I'd be pushing my luck. I mean, the past is past. I mean, somebody else will whiz by and do something better than you. That's fine, but you can't rest on your laurels. Retirement is like writing your own death certificate. Right now, I look at it and I'm just beginning. I never thought of quitting. Even if we succeed really soon with the speech prosthesis, then we'll go on to the next prosthetic. So there's no quitting. There's an endless road, and we'll just walk as far as we can.